Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Wedding Ceremony Podcast. We talk about anything and everything that has to do with wedding ceremonies. My name is Clint Huff, and with me is my co host, especial, the one and only JP Reynolds.
Clint, good to see you. Excited for our session today with our guest, who you will now introduce.
I am very excited because I've known Wendy for a long, long time. She's a brilliant event planner. She is Wendy Dahl. Wendy?
Hi, Clint.
I need to let you kind of behind the curtain. Wendy and I also have another podcast called the Spiritual Cake Podcast, where we discuss anything and everything that has to do with the spiritual side of our existence. But I've known Wendy as an event planner for, I think, about as long as I've known you, JP, which is a long, long time. Wendy, describe your event planning business because you have a specific niche.
Sure. So my company is called Chic Productions, and I started out just doing weddings like everyone else. And then I started doing South Asian weddings. And now that's primarily what we do. When we talk about South Asian weddings, it goes into all the various religions, which is really fun for our conversations on spiritual cake. But it's actually been quite a fun little trip down wedding lane.
When we start talking, because it's kind of like you and I, JP, where we'll chit chat a little bit before I hit the record button. What's fascinating to me is because she's doing South Asian, that includes Hindu and Muslim,
Sikh.
and Sikh, right? And so she, on many occasions, has gone into a temple or a cathedral or whatever the religious environment is, and she gets to watch their officiants or their clergy do wedding ceremonies, which is a completely different ball game, at least from my perspective. I don't know, Wendy, what do you think about that?
Absolutely. And it's interesting. We even have one of, they call them priests or pundit. We have one priest who's actually a white guy who went and lived in India and studied for many years. We asked him to do we get a lot of fusion weddings, obviously, because we know like both sides of many cultures and we can blend them nicely. And we asked him to do what we call a Western ceremony, which is like what you guys do, just, normal kind of ceremony. And he just kind of looked at me like I had two heads, like I wouldn't know the first thing about doing that kind of a ceremony.
So did you actually have to coach him through the process of doing that, or did he decide that it wasn't his cup of tea?
Oh, it wasn't his thing. So he hired somebody else to come in and do that part.
You and I did a wedding, I think about 6 months ago. What was fascinating to me is that your daughter is now in your business. She's in her
Mhm.
early 20s. It was pretty much just the two of you coordinating a wedding for, I think, about 120 people. I think that's my recollection. Is that right?
Yeah, we actually do many that are in the 300 range. There's two ways to manage something. One is with expertise, where you have experts that are doing things where you don't need a whole team of people just standing around. And two is to throw people at problems. In our case, we were experts. Caitlin's been with me for 10 years. She's turning 27 this year. Yeah, she started working with me when she was 16. And so she's actually got more experience with weddings than many wedding planners that have their own businesses. With as many weddings as we do, I feel like sometimes we share a brain. Like I'll be thinking something and she's over there doing it. And I'm like, this is so fantastic.
JP, you know how sometimes our business will slow down in the winter months? Wendy, you had what, two or three weddings in December? And then just kind of explain that process because you're working with different cultures and their calendar operates differently than
Very
I think
differently.
yeah.
Yes. Well, many of them are doing multi-day events. And so they always look at holiday weekends first, thinking, oh, my guests have time off. And so I'll land on that weekend because then we can enjoy the weekend together and no one's running away, after the wedding to get back home. So holiday weekends are always looked at as number one priority. Number two is that many of them don't celebrate Christmas. So last year we had a wedding right before, like the weekend before Christmas. The whole hotel's decked out in holiday stuff. And then we had a wedding the day after Christmas, like the very day after Christmas.
Wow.
And it's because they don't celebrate, which is, fine by us. I've actually done a wedding on Christmas Day before because, it was in the afternoon and it didn't impact my Christmas morning at all. And the kids back then, I was single and the kids were over with their dad and it was me and the dog. So I was like, I'm going to go to a wedding. Sure. They look at things very differently because they have extended days and they also celebrate different holidays than we do. And I mean, there's a lot of hotels aside from actual holidays themselves because the hotels are paying time and a half in labor and many of the teams do as well. They're always picking holiday weekends.
You know, the other thing that just occurred to me is that every time that we've had an event planner on the Wedding Ceremony podcast, and we bring up the idea of the amateurs as an officiant, the relative or the friend that's never done it before, and the same kind of foibles keep resurfacing, like they don't ask people to sit down or whatever the case may be. But you're always working with professionals. If I understand correctly, if they're doing a traditional thing, then they're going to have a traditional clergy perform the wedding ceremony. Is that true?
100%.
But you don't go through the same stuff that all these other people go through with the friend or the family thing.
Well, if we're doing a white dress wedding, yes. And there was one time where we called it the mashup wedding, where it was both parents had two different cultures in their lineage. And so they did all four cultures together during the same ceremony. And it just sort of had four different people walking through. It was a mandap, but it was also a huppah. It was also, two other versions of ceremonies. And they did all four within it. But it primarily, we are doing things with official clergy because it's interesting. Like when people call us and they're like, hey, have you ever done a Sikh wedding? And I'm just like, well, I feel like those are the most outside of a church, they're the most solemn and I guess the word is holy wedding because they have this holy book, and wherever the holy book is, it's like a temple. So the holy book doesn't come in until right before the ceremony starts, and it leaves after the ceremony. And then during the ceremony, everyone has their heads covered. It's quiet and reverent. So it's very different from what we see, what you guys see all the time, where it's like it's more relaxed. And yes, there's the pomp and circumstance of walking in and out and doing the right sequence of events as far as welcome and vows and things like that. It's just different because like when you walk into a space, they don't look at you and think, oh, he's bringing the temple with him. Kind of an interesting thing to see the difference in dynamic of all the different types of ceremonies that we do for sure.
I've often thought that about JP, that he brings the temple with him. Every time I see him, I always think, oh, we're in the temple of JP right now.
Yeah.
Stop. But Wendy, I like the phrase you used, white dress wedding.
Mm-hmm.
Could you say a little bit more about that?
Sure. So when we do South Asian weddings, they're generally never in white because white is the color of death in their culture. And so they're usually wearing colorful outfits. Traditionally red, but we're seeing a lot more pink and different colors now. And then if they're a super fusion wedding, then they'll still be wearing like an Indian outfit, maybe in an ivory, but never like a stark white. So a white dress wedding is anyone wearing a white wedding gown that celebrates any kind of religion that is not Hindu, Muslim, Sikh, that kind of they're not like a South Asian wedding. And so a white dress wedding is what we see all the time. When you're looking in the magazines and all that stuff, that's generally what you see is a white dress wedding.
Now, comparing the Sikh to a traditional Hindu wedding is a
Mm-hmm.
completely different vibe, if I understand correctly, because anytime that I've seen or talked to people that have been to a Hindu wedding ceremony, people are kind of wandering around and doing all kinds of stuff. Did I get the right impression of that?
Well, yeah. So, we actually had our first from South India. We did there where Tamil was one of the areas that they were from. And so, in their wedding ceremony was 3.5 hours.
Wow.
So that's the record of all the ceremonies that we've ever seen or done. What we love about the Hindu wedding is that there is so much joy in them. Like when the groom comes in from the barat, and everybody's having a great time, and then the bride's family receives the groom before they even go into the mandap, and the mandap is like the structure that they get married inside of. And so the bride's family is waiting to receive the groom and his family, and they do all kinds of blesses him, does all these cute little things, and pinches his nose and feeds him a sweet, and I watch this little pinching nose, and a lot of our clients or physicians or big time CEOs or they're like people that you just don't see getting their noses pinched. And there they are getting their nose pinched. But then they walk into the ceremony. The most sacred thing actually happens first in a Hindu ceremony, and it's the Ganesh Puja. And that's where they call in Ganesh into the ceremony to make it's kind of like the holy book has arrived, only in this case they're calling in Ganesh.
Ganesh is a deity?
Yes, it's their deity. But yeah, after that, I mean, I feel like they're playing games, they're stealing the groom's shoes, they're feeding each other sweets, they're putting on jewelry, they're walking around fires, they're tying knots on things, they're putting garlands on. They even play games sometimes where there's like a bowl, they put milk in it with like pearls or rice and they hide the rings. And whoever pulls out the ring first is going to be the leader of the marriage. It's just different. And so it's a little bit longer. I'd say the average right now for a Western version of a Hindu ceremony is about an hour. But for the most part, we see the couples that are getting married have never been exposed to their own culture. And so they're experiencing these things for the first time. And so I predict that when the generation that's getting married now has children and their children get married, I'm curious to see if some of these customs are followed then. Because many times they're like, what's going on? Like there was one time there was they call them pujas, and it's like a ceremony. And so each puja is done at a different time. And there was one particular puja where the priest came and he was tying a cord under the feet and over the groom's head, like over and over, like 7 times. And I was like, what are they doing? And the groom actually had the most confused look on his face, like, okay, we're now having a robe going over my head, down under my feet. It's just so different. They're having a good time, and the things that are sacred and holy are kept sacred and holy. But for the most part, it's like so much joy. You just see the happiness, and in their culture, instead of like getting married and going off and doing your own family, you get married and the circle of family is bigger, and they're all still fully involved in each other's lives and stuff. And so it's kind of fun to be able to do a different culture.
Oh, yeah. It sounds like a lot of fun. If the couple is surprised by what's happening during the ceremony, I infer from that that there's no rehearsal, that you show up and just hope that
No.
the officiant will lead you through everything.
Yes, absolutely. And that I think was the hardest adjustment for us, because you still have different groups of people going in for the ceremony, and each one has a different order depending on where they're from in the country. Like sometimes there's a wedding party and sometimes the bride goes in. Most traditionally, the bride comes in with an uncle. But now I feel like we're kind of getting a lot more fusion with ceremonies where the brides, so what happens is the groom, remember I was telling you before the ceremony, the bride's mom receives the groom. And then she walks with her spouse up into the mandap with the groom and his parents. So you have both sets of parents with the groom and the priest inside of the mandap. And then the bride comes in, remember, after the Ganesh Puja. So sometimes it's like 5, 10 minutes. So brides used to just come in with uncles, and that was like the normal thing. But now they want their parents to come and bring them in. And so the parents will come out of the mandap, put their shoes back on, because when you're going into the mandap, you always take your shoes off. It's still like holy ground. So they put their shoes back on, come back at the bride, walk her down the aisle, take their shoes back off, and go back up on the stage.
Is the priest telling them take your shoes off, put shoes back on, take your shoes off, or is that
No,
just
I think
understood?
it's just a known thing. There's so much respect in their culture. I think one of the sweetest parts for me is they do this thing when they're showing reverence or honoring somebody, they touch their feet. And so
Oh,
oftentimes during the ceremony at the end, the bride and groom go in and they're touching the feet of their parents and they're touching the feet of the priest, kind of like thank you for everything. And like I was telling you about the ceremony that was 3.5 hours long, the groom was on the ground on his belly kissing their feet. Wow, I think that's like the most gratitude I've ever seen, because normally it's just like they just touch their feet and show that. And so sometimes they'll even go outside of the mandap and they'll touch, like the family elders are sitting in the front row and they'll touch all their feet too. So it's cute little custom that they do to show gratitude and honor and respect towards the elders.
so it makes me think that the mandap, is it like a standard size? Because you have all these people moving in and out. It's got to be big enough so that people can maneuver. Is there
Yes.
like do you tell them that it's a standard size, or is there a company that just brings the mandap?
Yes. And as far as mandap design goes, when I first started doing South Asian weddings, they were all golden and carved and very, dramatic and very, very from India looking. And now we're doing more of a Western fusion with the mandap. And I would say that the average size is a 10 by 10. Well, just imagine like a 10-foot cube, 10 foot tall, 10 foot wide, and everything. And so normally what happens in a typical setup is the mandap, you have 4 posts and then it's covered on the top, much like a huppah. It's funny. My daughter and I, when she first started, she goes, Mom, all of the ceremonies are so similar, because we've seen so many of them. Even the ones with the imams have a very similar thing where it's like, you're there with families on the stage and stuff. And so,
Just to
mhm.
clarify, imam is the Muslim wedding, right?
Yes, the
Yeah,
imam is the Muslim officiant.
right. Okay.
In a Hindu ceremony, the stage is set up where in the center of the stage, they call it the Havan Kund, which is the fire pit. They light a fire during the ceremony, and there's a part where they walk around the fire and it invokes these blessings and stuff. And there's cute things where they have like piles of rice and they kick the rice over and you get a blessing every time you kick. And that's what I'm telling you. I'm like, I
This
love
is
them.
awesome. I love all of this stuff. I think it's
Yes.
great.
So the setup is the fire's in the middle. The bride and groom are sitting with their backs. Well, they're facing the audience. So they're sitting facing the audience, and then you have both sets of parents on each side. And in some cases, there's other family members up there too. So sometimes it's just two chairs for the parents. Other times it's been like we've had extra chairs, like another row of like three or four chairs for other family elders or like important sisters. We had one once where she wanted her whole wedding party up there. So it was like this really long rectangle with all these like canopies and so she had her whole wedding party sitting up there in chairs. So it was like the parents, the grandparents, wedding party, and then the bride and groom were in the middle.
I just realized you had to learn a whole new vocabulary in order to
Hmm.
understand each of these cultures, which,
Hmm.
I mean, it just rolls off your tongue, which tells me that you've said this thing a billion times for
Oh yeah,
how many years? When did you first start doing the South Asian weddings?
probably year two. Before I started my own business, I was helping another wedding planner and she was doing South Asian weddings. And so I had learned, I think maybe might have done a handful, like maybe three or four of them. And I had learned a little bit from that. But when you're an assistant for somebody, you don't learn the mechanics and the whys. You're just knowing, like, hey, I need this set up by this time. I need to have the bride here by this time. But you don't know that they're doing a Ganesh puja. You don't know all the things that are needed at the mandap. You're back there with the elephant or the horse walking in with the groom. So
Oh, that's right. Okay, so the groom rides in. I didn't know if this was on the wedding day or if it was one of the celebrations the previous days, but the whole idea about the horse or the elephant is leading up into the actual wedding ceremony.
yes. And so traditionally in India, the whole town gets together and follows the groom to the ceremony. And
Oh,
so,
I did a wedding where they did the white dress wedding first, and then they did the Hindu wedding after that. So after the white wedding, the groom got into a car and he drove to the airport, got into a helicopter because they didn't have a horse or an elephant, but he decided to arrive on the flying metal elephant, which is what he called the helicopter, and that was
yep,
his way of making his entrance. And I don't know, have you ever seen anything like that where they substitute something for the animals?
absolutely. We actually won an award once for, we had a couple that was getting married in Huntington Beach, and the particular venue, it has a bridge from the beach to the hotel.
Right.
And the bridge comes out right at the ceremony lawn. And so he had a husky at home. They lived in Michigan and they couldn't bring the husky. And I used to, when I had an office before COVID, I had on the wall, it was written, it says, what if? Like, what if we could? Kind of stuff. And so she was like, I wish there was a way I could surprise him with our dog. And I was like, I wonder if there's a way that we could get like a dog sled to come and bring him into the ceremony. I wonder if there's something like that here. Literally one city away, it's a company called Urban Mushers, and they made a chariot for street riding, where they all do this, but urban mushers means they're not up in the snow. So they're just running around with their modified bikes that they turned into like a sled, only it has wheels. And so they decorated it, and he came in behind a team of sled dogs, and it was like anybody who was outside or staying at that hotel was just like gobsmacked that here we were with this team of urban mushers taking the groom to a ceremony.
Wendy, you don't understand how powerful the word gobsmacked is
Really?
in this podcast. JP,
Really?
it's one of his favorite words.
It is one of my favorite words.
Is
Yes.
it?
Yes. Yes.
Well, I feel like dumbfounded doesn't quite get you there.
Yes.
So,
No,
or
the
shocked isn't even
gobsmacked.
there either.
Yeah.
Gobsmacked is
When you
it.
just said it, I thought, oh, yes. Okay. Uh, yes, I am gobsmacked that you use gobsmacked.
That's
So
funny.
you go. Yes. Yes.
That was one of those great moments for the history of the podcast where everybody who's listening is kind of like, what did she just say? Oh my gosh. Awesome. That's awesome. It's interesting that you have to go through all of this extra planning logistically for all of the ceremonies that you do because of the deep traditions, especially, well, maybe I don't know, especially you can tell me when you do a fusion wedding, then your creativity really kicks into play. Do you communicate with the officiants in order to figure out what the fusion actually is, or how does that process come about?
Well, if we're doing everything in one ceremony, yes. but it's often where, like the mashup wedding that we did with four different cultures in one ceremony, that was like a one time in 20 years kind of thing. The other time where I was telling you, where I had asked the Hindu priest if he would do a white dress wedding, and he just looked at me like, no, I don't do that. That was one of, I've probably done two where we do a fusion ceremony together, where there's the Hindu and then the white dress part together, the Christian part together. Most commonly, they do separate ceremonies entirely, and even separate days. So we have one coming up in December. And in fact, I just got an email from one that's trying to book us for next year in the late summer, where day one will be the Hindu ceremony with the lunch, and then they do a welcome event, which we call the Sangeet when we do South Asian weddings. So that would be like the South Asian day, and then the second day would be the white dress wedding, followed by cocktails and reception. So something to know that's different about South Asian weddings is that they follow auspicious days and auspicious times.
All right.
And so there's certain lucky days during the year that they all pick. And if I could replicate myself a dozen times, I could sell myself 12 times for the same day because they all want the same day. But then there's also auspicious times. And so the priest will tell them when the auspicious time is, which is usually in the morning at some point. And there's a different puja depending on where they're from in India that they have to do at that auspicious time. We're often doing like a morning, like we have one coming up on, well, actually we have two. We have but the one that's coming up that I'm thinking of the most right now is on Memorial Day weekend, where in the morning we're starting the ceremony at 10. It will go until well, the barat's at 10. The ceremony's at 10:30, and then we end and do lunch because they needed that morning time, auspicious time. And then we go, there's a break, and then there's cocktails and dinner. It's funny, we're getting a lot of inquiries right now for people that are like, hey, we're trying to figure out ways to save on this, and it's 300 people and so many days and so much time. Like, how do we do this? And I was like, well, if you scratch the morning ceremony and do like the Western format of afternoon ceremony, cocktails, and reception, you're saving yourself from serving breakfast and lunch for 300 people. And that all adds up when you're doing 3-4 days full of events and you're feeding them breakfast, lunch, and dinner. But yeah, it's kind of fun to see how everybody does it. But typically they keep them separate ceremonies.
So I have one last question, and then I'll let JP kind of dive in with whatever he wants to sum up. But I'm curious about the marriage license. So if you have multiple ceremonies, is there a standard practice for who signs the marriage license?
Yes, it's generally the priest, and he'll sign it after the ceremony. Well, it depends on, because there's some priests that don't sign them. And so in that case, the couple has to go get married at a, courthouse. Or we had a couple last month who just went to Vegas, and they're like, hey, we're just going to make it a thing. So they went to Vegas and got their actual, their certificate done there. But then the ceremony was done by the Hindu priest, and for whatever reason, sometimes they don't sign them, and I'm not sure why. I've never asked. But if there's like a white dress wedding and a Hindu wedding on 2 different days, then I have to ask them, well, who would you like to sign your marriage license?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Which day are we going to sign it?
JP, any final comments or questions?
This could turn into an all-day marathon workshop. Just fascinating. What a wonderful skill you have developed, Wendy,
Thank you.
what a wonderful gift, given the scope, given the size of so many of the weddings that you create. I can only imagine the family anxiety and tensions, and that's a whole other podcast in looking at
sure, Zen space.
navigate.
Yes.
Where today we've talked about what we're visually seeing, but behind the scenes, I salute you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, we truly love it. And I think this kind of coincides with what I talk about on the Spiritual Cake podcast with Clint, where it's like, if you stay curious about people's faith and their religions and you learn about them, it's fascinating to me to learn what people believe. And I think, I don't know, was it this podcast where I talked about the coconut?
Yes.
It was.
Yes.
That is still a story that's quite popular at that Ritz-Carlton hotel where.
Oh, it's popular on this podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah, because when we were approaching episode number 100, and right now we're at episode 300 something or other, but episode 100, one of our listeners from Australia sent us coconuts because of that story. Yep.
Because of my story. Yeah. Well, I feel like those are those defining moments that you have in your life where when that mom looked at me in the eye and she's like, "Your God and my God are the same God," I thought, she's not wrong.
There you
You
go.
know?
There you go. Wendy, this is spectacular. And I know we're going to bring you back. I just know because JP just kind of lifted the lid on that whole big barrel of stuff that happens
Oh
behind the
yeah.
scenes. I love that stuff. Wendy, tell everybody how they get in touch with you.
You can find me at chicproductions.com, and it's the French word chic, not the turban chic. It's CHIC Productions with an S.com. It's funny, Clint. You'll see sometimes I'll be at places and people are like, "What's the name of your company?" And I said Chic Productions, and then they go, and I'm like, "No, not the turban." It's really cute.
That's cool. JP, tell everybody how they get in touch with you.
I am at jprweddings.com. Everything is there on the website.
Excellent. You should also know that JP is an accomplished author. His books are in the Amazon store and in the Kindle store in Amazon, and he tells you how to officiate a wedding ceremony, how to prepare for your wedding ceremony. It's just brilliant. Plus, he's a communications expert. Thebusinessofconfidence.com is that website. And my website is simply my name, Clint Huff, CLINTHUFFT.com for all the things that I do. That's it for this episode of the Wedding Ceremony Podcast. This is Clinton on behalf of JP and Wendy. We will see you next time.